Hello, this is Kevin Vandekar here. I'm going to be presenting over the next 10 days the 3ds Max SDK. So today I'd like to start off by introducing you to the team that I work for. Before we get started though, I'd like to do just an introduction to live meeting. So first of all, at the top of your live meeting window you should see a Q&A menu. And what you can do is click that and you can open up the Q&A manager and basically ask questions as you go through. So this will be a way for you to ask things during the presentation, and we have some moderators on the line, so we will hopefully be able to answer those questions immediately. But if it's something that we don't know directly, what we'll do is we will record the question and we'll go ahead and answer it in the next day's session. So go ahead and make use of the Q&A section. The other thing I want to point out is that there is a handouts section in the live meeting window, and this allows you to download the documents that are accompanying the presentation. So for each day I will be uploading the presentations as well as any exercise material. And we will also be posting the video from the prior day, so if you missed any part of the presentation you can get caught up by looking at the video. In the past we've had trouble with the size of the videos in the handouts section, but if that's the case this time around, we will go ahead and post them to an FTP site and give you the address. So an introduction to who I am. My name is Kevin Vandekar. I'm a principal developer consultant working in ADN. I've been with Autodesk for many years, currently working in the Sparks program under the Autodesk Developer Network, and my main focus is supporting 3ds Max and the FBX APIs. So here is my email address, so feel free to go ahead and send me email anytime during the 2 weeks of this presentation, and I can also answer questions that way. So let me introduce you to the Autodesk Developer Networks. We have a Sparks program that falls under that, and the Sparks program is designed to specialize in the media and entertainment products. So, of course, Autodesk provides market-leading tools for commercial plug-in development. This is within the entertainment, film, television, and games industries. And it also includes visualization of design data. So if you're using 3ds Max Design, it falls into our group as well. So the Sparks products include 3ds Max and Max Design, Maya, Motion Builder, and the FBX SDK. Those are our primary products. We also have other products such as Mudbox, and those would also fall into our category, but these are our primary products that we focus on. So nearly all of the Autodesk product APIs are supported under the Autodesk Developer Network. So it doesn't matter which field you are in. So for example, if you might be an AutoCAD developer and also using 3ds Max Design, both of those products fall under our umbrella, and of course you could get support from us. So the partner philosophy through the ADN program is that basically we recognize that customer needs vary. So customers often are faced with these questions. Do they need off-the-shelf or a custom solution? Many times it's a custom solution, and this is where our partners fall into our organization. Do they have a general need or a specialized need? So again, many people don't use 3ds Max off the shelf. They have a specialized need to plug it into their pipeline, and this is where our partners come into play. Industry standards or leading edge technology. So this has to do with whether or not the customer is at the leading edge of technology and they need support in that technology. Cost sensitive or feature sensitive. This has to do with whether they just want an off-the-shelf solution and pay the base price, or are they willing to pay for extra features and include our partners in the ultimate solution. And then finally, there's also almost always some sort of regional requirement, and we rely very heavily on many of our regional partners to help us fill those needs with our customers. So we are building these partnerships through the ADN Sparks program, and this is again where the media and entertainment software come into play. Autodesk owns most of the, or many of the high-end media and entertainment products, and as a result we enjoy a very large market share. And with that market share, it brings you into the mix as a commercial developer to be able to access that market share. Our customers are also the largest in global film, games, and television markets. So anyone using Maya or 3ds Max, for example, are an Autodesk customer. Many of our customers have very complex pipelines that require specialized solutions, and again, our partners help create those. And then what this all results in is the partnership between the Autodesk products and the plugins is just good business and satisfied customers. So we recognize this. We provide different ways of supporting you in becoming a partner. For example, you can see at the bottom we provide logos that you can put into your products so that customers can very clearly see that you are compatible with 3ds Max, for example. So the Sparks program today, we have currently about 650 M&E specific ADN Sparks members. And we categorize them in certain ways. So a commercial plugin developer is of course someone who's reselling their plugin in conjunction with an Autodesk product. We also have customers that are corporate customers. So for example, perhaps you're a game developer and you're using our products in-house, but you're also developing apps for your solutions, and that would be considered a corporate developer. Subscription customers also fall into that category. Authors and publishers, people who are writing about our software, somehow publishing information, bloggers, etc. Hardware partners, this would be people like NVIDIA or the Spaceball people, hardware vendors who are creating plugins to work with our software. Consultants are not necessarily creating a specific solution for resale, but they're actually helping other customers to have a custom solution. And then the final category is around education. So there are different levels of ADN membership. We've just launched this new idea called ADN Open, and you can read more about it by going to the ADN Open page here. This is basically free access to the Autodesk Developer Network resources. It basically includes forums, pointers to ADN specific blogs, etc. So this is all the stuff that we produce and publish for everyone. And then if you need something more like technical or marketing support, you would consider the ADN annual subscription. And you can go to the link to find out the price points there. There's different levels of membership as well. It basically, as once you become an annual member, it gives you access to all of the Autodesk software for development purposes. So that alone is a huge gain. So if you need Maya, 3ds Max, one of the entertainment suites, Mudbox, whatever it is, you get that as part of the annual subscription. It's provided to you for development purposes. We also give technical support, so you get direct technical support via the DevHelp online system. And we also give marketing support so that once your plugin is ready, we can help you in different ways to market that. That's the entry point into the Autodesk customer base that we can share with you. And then we also provide trainings and mentoring, so other various ways of getting technical support from us. And then the last way is subscription support directly. So if you're a large customer and you already have Platinum access, just know that that includes ADN membership. So if you're not already a Platinum member, that's one of the main benefits to jumping up to Platinum, is you get ADN membership. And then finally, I'd just like to introduce you to our team. So again, my name is Kevin Vandekar, and I'm located in the Manchester, New Hampshire office. We have Christine Middlemiss and Naichi Wang, who are located in the Toronto office. That's in the old Alias site, but it's now an Autodesk site, and they are primarily focused on Maya and Motion Builder products. Cyril Falvel is our manager, and he resides in France, and he specializes in FBX, Maya, and other products within the M&E umbrella. And then finally we have Akira Kudo in Tokyo, Japan, and he has specialties in 3ds Max, and he's also supporting the other products as well. Okay, so let's get started with the Max SDK training. The first module is basically an introduction to all the different types of customization that you can do in 3ds Max. The idea here is to give you a brief introduction to the different customization areas so that when you're working with the C++ Max SDK, you know how the other customization areas work in conjunction with your plugin. So this module is basically an introduction to all the different types of customization that you can do. So the goal is to discuss what, why, and how for each type of customization, and we're going to be covering general user interface customizations, Max script. We're going to look briefly at the .NET API, and then that will lead us into the C++ Max SDK. So user interface customization, there's basically a dialog box that you can access from the application, and I'm going to show you a demo of that later. But this is a very easy way to get into customizing the 3ds Max workflow. So you could improve the efficiency of your artists and other production people. You make the most common tasks more accessible. Having your favorites basically easily accessible and consistent is going to make you more productive. And then of course this all ties into any plugins that you develop, because it allows you to hook your plugin into other user interface areas. So it's available through this customization dialog, but it's also available directly to Max script and plugins through code. So you want to consider that your user interface is the customer's first exposure to your plugin. So you want to consider your UI design and its placement and where it's accessible from. And you should also consider where your UI entry should live. For example, is it a pull-down menu, or does it make more sense only as a toolbar? It could also be something that's initiated through a utility, for example. So there's many different things to consider there. So the prime user interface customization areas is basically keyboard shortcuts, so you can tie your commands directly to a shortcut. The toolbars, so the icon toolbars that can be floating or docked. The quad menus, so these are the menus that pop up within the viewports. There's also the regular menus, which is basically the menu bar across the top. And then also you can customize the colors of the user interface elements as well. So you can have a different color for the skin, different color for the buttons, etc. And these things you can control. And then slightly different entry point, but it's the same idea, is the new ribbon interface that was introduced with the Slate modeling tools. That can also be customized. So all of this customization can be stored via a UI file. This allows you to save and load the customization itself. These are text-based subfiles for each type of customization. So for example, there's a keyboard shortcut file, there's a menu bar file, etc. But it all lives under a parent UI. So one way to do this would be you could set up your customization on your machine and then save it as a UI file, and then you could share all of those UI files with your artists, and then they would have the same customization as you do. So it's a way to kind of maybe create some standardized ways of using 3ds Max within your production pipeline. But of course, you can also customize them directly from your plugin. So the MaxScript.NET API and the C++ Max SDK all provide entry points into programming this customization. So let's take a quick look at how this works. I'm going to switch over to 3ds Max, and I'm going to go to the Customize menu, and at the top you'll see Customize User Interface. Okay, and this brings up a dialog box, and you can see that there's keyboard shortcuts, the mouse can be customized, toolbars, the quad menu, the menu bar itself, and the colors, as I mentioned before. So just to give you an example, I'm going to go to the Menus section, and you can see that by default I have a category here that says ADN Samples, but in this drop-down list is all the categories that's provided not only by your plugin, but also by the built-in system. So for example, if you wanted to create a menu for cat, you could start here with the cat category, look at all of the commands, which are called actions, and then you could drag those over to a menu here. Okay, so I'm going to demo using our ADN samples. I'm going to create a new menu called ADN samples. Say OK. And now that shows up down here in the available menus. And all of these menus are pre-created menus for you as well. So you can simply drag these over and position them on the menu bar where you want them. And you can see as soon as I added that, up here it showed up. Okay? So for example, the cat category has its own menu already created. So you could just simply drag that over. So now what I want to do is build up that menu. Right now there's nothing on that menu, so I'm going to take my commands and I'm going to drag them over and position them on that menu. Okay. And this is all documented pretty well in the user guide because this is part of the user's experience in doing customization. Now the point here is that you can do this through the Customize User Interface dialog, but you could also program and create a menu on the fly as well. So in that case, I have a separate example here. It's on the utility bar, a sample that I created called Add Menu Demo. So this is a plugin that's a utility object, and we'll talk about the details of utility objects and all the different plugin types later. But just to show you how you can programmatically create user interfaces, I'm going to go to Add Menu Demo. And what you can see here is that just by going into the context of the utility, it's popped up an example menu. Now if I leave that context, you can see it disappeared. So what I'm doing is using the SDK to programmatically create the menu on the fly. Okay? The next topic I would like to cover is the MaxScript area of customization. So let's start with what it is. It's basically the scripting language for 3ds Max. It is proprietary to 3ds Max. It's a scripting language, so it's definitely simpler and easier to use than a language like C++. It is interpreted, so it's a true scripting language, and it's used to drive, create automation routines, do different things within 3ds Max that are repetitive, that kind of thing. It's not to be confused with real plugin development. There are some plugin facilities within 3ds Max script, but you wouldn't do full-on plugin development there. So why would you use it? Well, one good reason is to customize the user interface in an automated way. So what I showed you in the last section, a lot of those things can be automated. You can actually create new UI elements as well. So it might be something where you script your user interface for your plugin configuration, and you turn that on and off via scripting, but your plugin itself is a C++ plugin that does the heavy lifting. You might use it to automate repetitive tasks. This is a big one. Automate rendering, automate import, export routines, that sort of thing. You might also provide algorithmic traits to geometry or animation. So if you're an artist, for example, working on a scene, and what you need to do is animate a sphere going around a circle, and you want to do it over 36 keys, you could very easily script that and get the exact results you want. So it does provide the ability to program or configure C++ plugins. This is provided through an SDK facility called Function Publishing. So in your C++ plugin, what you would do is you would use this Function Publishing framework, which generates something that MaxScript can then see and work with. It is definitely quick and easy, and there's no compilation required. So the functionality here is pretty large. Almost anything that 3ds Max does, MaxScript can automate. It's including this list here, which I'm not going to read to you, but you can see that it covers a lot of ground. A good example is batch processing files, modifying geometry in an algorithmic way, configuring the particle flow system, driving the renderer. I mean, it's endless. So how do you use MaxScript? It is built in, so there's nothing extra to install. It's part of 3ds Max. When you install it, it's on the menu system. There's a menu bar item called MaxScript, and under that are two windows that you can enable. One is called the listener window, and that's like a console, and the other is an editor window, and that's where you can actually write and save your MaxScripts out. The nice thing about the built-in editor is that it has color, syntax, highlighting, and tabbing, and that sort of thing. There is a separate plugin called the Visual MaxScript plugin, and this provides you with a little bit more functionality. I'm not going to demo that, but just wanted to point out that it is there. The MaxScript itself is fundamentally text-based storage. There are some ways to encrypt it, so if you're concerned with security, there are some ways. It's not foolproof, but there are some ways. But essentially it is ASCII text-based storage. And what that means is you can also edit it in any other text editor that you would like. So if you use something like TextPad or Notepad, Note++, whatever, you can even turn on and create your own. I've seen people configure their editors with their own coloring for syntax. But the built-in editor is actually pretty powerful. And it does provide capability to auto-load and auto-run capabilities. So for example, if you want something to run every time you start up 3ds Max, you could configure it that way. You can also use things like callbacks to detect when Max is shutting down or when the active viewport is changing, so forth. So there's a whole event notification system that's provided as well. So let's take a quick look at how this works. I'm going to switch over to 3ds Max. Like I said, there's a MaxScript pull down. If we enable the listener window, you're going to get this window popping up. The macro recorder is disabled by default, so you want to get in the habit of enabling that. Once you enable it once, it's on between sessions, you don't have to worry about it. The one thing that the recorder does is it will record the commands that you perform in the user interface into the listener window. Okay, so one of the things that this is very powerful for is learning how to script features. What you can do is you can use the user interface to generate whatever sequence of events you want to script, and then simply copy and paste them into the MaxScript. So let me go ahead and erase that, and I'll show you how this works. I'm just going to copy that line that was recorded, and I'm going to run it in the console. So there's the same line, I just pasted it in there, and when I run it, I get a box that's created. Now you'll notice that it's created in a different space. It's oriented differently, and that's because I ran it in a different window than I originally created. So you have to be careful with transforms and that sort of thing. But you can see that things are echoed to the recorder window as you do them. Alright, the next thing I'm going to show is the editor window. So you can see I've got 4 different scripts loaded here, and you can see that there is color syntax highlighting here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reset my scene, just so I have a blank scene. Now this first script that I'm going to run is going to show you that you can do things like animate geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sphere, and I'm going to rotate that, so it's just a static transformation. I'm going to assign a material, so I need to create the material first. I'm going to position that in slot 1. Okay, and then I'm going to configure some of the properties on that material. So for example, here you see the coordinates for the U tiling and the V tiling. Okay, and once I have that material set up in slot 1, I can assign the material from slot 1 to the object's material property. So, and if you remember, the object to animate was the sphere that I created up here. Alright, the next section is to animate it, and this is an algorithmic piece of code that's basically going to perform some math to create the animation. So in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to animate that sphere through a helical pattern. So it's going to revolve around a center and go up in the z direction every revolution, or every tick of the revolution. So you can see here during these loops, I'm calculating the x and the y position, and I'm incrementing the z position, and then I'm assigning the position. Now notice that this is within an animate on block. Okay, so what I've done is I've turned on animation, and what that will do is that will animate any property that I change. So for each position, it's going to create a new key, and basically you're going to see that animation take place. The next section real quick here is to add a modifier. So I'm going to add the noise modifier, create a new instance of that. I go to the modifier stack, and I'm going to reference my noise modifier, and I'm going to set its properties. Okay, and then I go back into an animate block, and what I'm also going to do is animate the modifier's strength. So at time start, I'm going to set strength to this value, and at time end, I'm going to set strength to this value. All right. So that basically sets a begin and end strength value, and it will morph through those values as the animation continues. I'm going to also create a camera, and I'm going to assign that to the viewport. So I basically create a new camera, and then I'm setting up the viewport to display the camera. And then I'm going to finally render that camera with some various output, and at the end I'll put up a finished box. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. I'm going to just move this aside a little bit. I'm going to say Tools, Evaluate All. You'll see the sphere created, and it's being rendered now through all the frames, and then it's writing the file to disk, and then I get my finished dialog. Okay, so if we look at the scene now, you'll see that animation was created. You'll see that the noise modifier has been applied. You can kind of see the geometry bubbling a little bit to represent that noise. And then the eyeball bitmap was applied to it. So everything that I scripted was done from a blank screen, a blank scene. If we go back here and take a look at this, something interesting to know is that, for example, the noise modifier itself is a plugin. And so what we've done is that plugin has done a function publishing on the property called seed in this example. And what that does is that allows me to configure that plugin from MacScript. So that's why this is kind of important to understand at the beginning, just so as you're thinking about the architecture of whatever plugin you're going to develop, you think about this up front. That function publishing, for example, is really useful so that you can expose your things to the MacScript engine. Alright, let's just take a quick look at a couple more examples. So this one is going to display a message in the viewport. So this is a little bit UI oriented. So I'm just going to say Tools, Evaluate All. You'll see down here I have a little yellow block with the word hello in it. And its behavior is using callbacks. So when I change the active viewport, that little label follows it. Okay, it's a simple example, but it does show that there's callbacks so that you can be notified and change what your application is doing, and that you do have access to things like the graphics window as well. All right, and then this last example is another user interface type thing, and what it's going to do is pop up a frame that's docked in the Max window. So let's just go ahead and run this, and you can see what happens. So down here I get a dialog, or a little panel that has a node edit box, a faces edit box, and a vertices edit box. So if I go over here and select the sphere, you'll see that the node name is displayed, the number of faces, and the vertices. And this is also working on the notion of callbacks. So basically when something is selected, it's going to populate this panel with the data, right? So really useful technology. When you're thinking of plugin development on the C++ side, you should definitely consider the function publishing framework to expose your plugin capability to MaxScript. Okay, so next we'll talk about the .NET API. So this is a managed extension of the C++ Max SDK libraries. It's mainly designed to be used as an automation style language. So similar to MaxScript, where you can automate certain algorithms to make things easier. We have introduced a new assembly called autodesk.max.dll, which is the SDK wrapper. So basically there's a one-to-one mapping on the managed side mapped to the C++ functions. So you can use languages like C#, VB.NET, C++, CLI. We've also heard reports of people getting IronPython to work with a little extra effort, and basically the idea is that any managed language that can create an assembly that can be auto-loaded by 3ds Max's managed framework can be used. So why would you want to use the .NET API? Well, the first reason, and this has been the historical reason, is for sophisticated managed UI capabilities. So when the ribbon came online, that is a managed user interface component. So a lot of work was done to add a managed framework to 3ds Max in general, and that was exposed. I believe that was done back in 2008. So since then it's matured a little bit, and so you might want to use it simply to interface with other .NET API components. So for example, maybe you would use C++, the native side, for your main plugin functionality, and then have a mixed mode assembly with C++ CLI to interface with other components like maybe the XML framework or something else that's part of the managed framework. Of course, the .NET API includes huge areas. All of the Microsoft Cloud computing stuff is managed, and ASP.NET and all of that kind of stuff would require you to somehow interface. So that's another good example, is just being able to interface with other managed components. And then again, automation routines like MaxScript, but you have a full debugger, it's got a compiler, there's symbols that get created, and you can debug through your managed code. All of that is very well supported. And then there's also good interop with MaxScript. So you might do some of your sophisticated routines in .NET and then use MaxScript to actually initiate and run those routines. So what is it? Well, historically it's a bit complicated. So again, it was initially introduced in 2008 mainly to support the user interface changes that were going on in Max itself. And then MaxScript interop was added, and that made it much more usable from a typical automation style routine. In the 2012 Subscription Advantage Pack, we introduced this new wrapper DLL, the Autodesk.max.dll, and this was now rolled into 2013 and will be carried forward. So the combination of all these assemblies that have been historically introduced now forms a pretty complete picture for an automation style API set. So in theory, any of the automation techniques that you would want to do, any sophisticated UI that you want to add, those are all now very robust in the .NET API. The one thing that you cannot do is create a full plugin. So deriving from a renderer, for example, or geom object to create a geometry object or a modifier, those things are not supported in .NET API. So to learn all about it, we have updated the documentation. So 2013 reorganized it a little bit, but 2012 has pretty much all the functionality. So let me just bring up the help for this just so you have a good idea. In the SDK, the C++ SDK, when you install it, the documentation will have a pointer to the online docs. So in theory, you don't even need to install the SDK. You can just go directly to the online docs and read about this. In the Programmer's Guide, there's a section called 3ds Max.NET SDK, and here's a section called the .NET Assemblies, and you can see all the assemblies that are supported for managed development. The Autodesk.Max was the new wrapper assembly, so this is where all your automation style routines are going to be. And there's a whole section here that talks about how to use this new wrapper DLL. So how are we going to use the Max.NET API? Well, ideally you should install the Max SDK. So you get the C++ SDK installed. You primarily do that simply because a lot of the functionality that is in the managed side, because they are wrappers, you're going to find examples of the techniques on how to do certain things in the C++ SDK. So even though the actual programming constructs are different, you're going to be programming in a managed language, the sequence and the techniques of things might be helpful to look at the C++ samples and even the C++ documentation. So once you're ready to go, you're going to choose a managed language in an IDE. So let's say you choose Visual C#, you're going to have Visual Studio, and you'll create a new project. So you create a new class library DLL. And then within that project you would reference R assemblies that you want to consume. Okay? And that's pretty much it. Once you build your standard managed assembly and place it in a specific location, 3ds Max will start up and it will load and initialize and do the handshaking at startup to make sure it can register your plugin, your automation routine, and then it will work from there. So let's take a quick look at this. Okay, so we've got 3ds Max loaded up here with some objects in the scene, and I'm going to demonstrate some .NET samples. So if you remember early in the presentation I talked about how these menu items were actually defined by a managed application. So you saw how I dragged those over and created a menu out of those. So I could have programmatically created this menu as well for the managed app, but in this case I used the customized user interface dialog. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show just a real quick example here. So this is a managed application and it's using WPF. So you can see I get some of the nicer capabilities of the WPF user interface controls, and I can interface with 3ds Max using the wrapper DLL to create geometry now. Okay, so now I have access to the scene and all the things in it. So that's a simple example. The create teapot basically just created a teapot in the center and was done with it. All right, so this next one's a little bit more interesting, and again, it is a WPF example. But notice that it follows, so I'm using again the notification system in the manage side now, and I can get it to follow the active viewport. It's also using WPF, and so I was able to create a single dialog that was transparent in terms of its panel itself, and then the controls have some transparency assigned to them as well. So you can actually see the geometry through the controls. Alright, I can do things like select things here, so let's select those two items. And if I say select nodes, it's going to go over here and select those nodes. Okay, you can see I have two objects selected. So let's clear the selection, select just the box, select nodes. Now you see I've got the box selected. Alright. I can do things like list only the lights, so I can actually use something like the link facility to subset a list of items. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at how the interop works between the .NET API and MaxScript. So I have a simple MaxScript here. I'm using the .NET class functionality of MaxScript, so this is basically a function, and what you do is you pass in the name of the class you want to load. So I've got a namespace called ADN samples, and it's got a class called ADN functions, and within that functions are some static functions. Okay, so I get an instance of that class, and then I can do something like show methods, and that's going to list the methods that it found. And then I can actually run one of the methods, so in this case it's called sample5 face iteration, and I'm passing in the handle of the selected object. Now this is one aspect that is limited in the interop, so basically you can only pass back and forth the plain data types, so integers, doubles, etc. You can't pass a node, for example, because the MaxScript and the manage side, they don't understand that in the same context. So in this case I'll just use a handle to get the node that I want. So let's go ahead and run this. Tools, evaluate all. And I've got a breakpoint set. So I just wanted to show that this is one advantage of managed development, is that you have a full-on debugger here. Okay, you have locals, watch, you have a call stack, all the things you would expect in a managed application. Okay, so in this application I'm using the new Autodesk.Max wrappers. I'm getting a global, I'm getting the interface, and we're going to talk about the core interface in the C++ side in the next few sessions. I can then take the handle that gets passed in and get the node by handle, and that gives me a node. Now once I have the node, I can do some work on it. So what I'm going to basically do is determine if it's a try-object based object, and if it is, I'm going to for each iterate across the face collection and duplicate that face in the scene as a new object. Okay, so that's all this code is doing. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And you'll see over here that I had selected, I'm sorry about that, I had selected the cone, and it positioned a new duplicate of the cone right at the origin, and it changed the orientation to be up. So if I select any one of those, you can see that it is now a whole bunch of individual meshes. Okay, so this routine automated an aspect of the geometry that I wanted to do very quickly, and it worked very well. Alright, so that wraps it up for the .NET API. So as you can see, it's pretty powerful. It's really good, again, for automation style routines and for really nice user interfaces. So that brings us to the Max SDK. So it's mainly used for plugin development. Basically, if it can be done in 3ds Max, in all likelihood, it is possible in the C++ SDK. It is the most robust environment. It's basically provided as a set of C++ libraries and headers. It's an object-oriented environment. When you create a plugin, you're going to derive from one of the base classes that we provide. We just talked about the .NET API, and it is a mirror of the SDK, but it is meant only for automation-style routines, where the SDK, basically the C++ side, opens up the whole world to deriving from our base classes and basically giving you access to geometry objects, modifiers, renderers, pretty much anything that you can do in 3ds Max. So it does require knowledge of C++, but there's also many, many resources available. C++ is a very mature and sophisticated language. It does have its problems in terms of ease of use, but it is very robust and gives you the most flexibility. So why would you use it? Basically, there's functionality for nearly everything. It's flexible. You can modify existing behaviors. You can provide new functionality. Simply providing a new plugin will give a new class of object, for example. So it's just very, very sophisticated and robust. You would use it for internal use of task automation or proprietary internal features. Let's say, for example, you want to have some proprietary behavior for hair, for example. You could easily write a plugin to develop your own type of hair and its behavior. Of course, commercial plugins is the primary use for it, and this is where many people, develop plugins for resale. So from a functionality standpoint, it is, again, the most robust and flexible environment. This list is, a pretty big list, and basically anything on here you can do in the C++ side. How to use the Max SDK. So first of all, what you're going to do is install the SDK from the 3ds Max media. So depending on how you receive 3ds Max, if it's an ADN copy or a subscription copy, you're more than likely going to download it. It's going to be an executable. You're going to extract it, and it's going to put the extracted files in the Autodesk directory on the C drive. Once it's extracted, the installer will automatically launch, and you'll install 3ds Max as usual. So one of the things that's changed in 2013 is that in order to install the x86 version, is after you've installed the x64 version, you'll go back and you'll click the setup for the Win32 or the x86 version. So that gets Max itself installed, the product. The next thing you're going to need to do is install the SDK. Now you can go back into the setup, and there's a tools section where you can choose to install the SDK from, or you can just browse directly to the extracted folder, and it's under the the x86 tools Max SDK folder, and you can run that MSI directly. The MSI will install the SDK, and it includes both Win32 and x64 versions, so you'll get both sets of libraries. There are compiler requirements, and this is very important. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click this and take you into the help. So I encourage you to take a look at this and become really serious about abiding by it, because each version may change the compiler version. So for example, with 2013 we are now requiring Visual C++ 10 with Service Pack 1. So this is included with Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1. So when you install Visual Studio 2010, you're going to get Visual C++, or if depending on what version you have, you may have to select it on. But once it's installed, make sure you also go back and get Service Pack 1. Now the reason for this is binary compatibility. So you'll notice in 2012 we were supporting Visual C++ 9, and this was a little bit weird because we provided all of our samples in Visual C++ 10 project format. So even though we did that, you had to choose the tool set that was compatible with Visual C++ 9. So all of this comes down to binary compatibility. Now, I've had many reports that say, well, when working on 2012, I can use Visual C++ 10, and when working on 2013, I can use Visual C++ 9. Yes, it may work, but the problem is that if anything changed, for example, if Microsoft changed the behavior of templates, that behavior is going to affect your application, and those kinds of defects are very, very difficult to track down. So I just encourage you from the beginning to choose the right compiler for the version of 3ds Max that you're going to be working with. So the SDK includes a plugin wizard. For 2013, the plugin wizard is kind of broken. I was not able to get it to work at all, so I took the liberty of modifying it for this class, and I've uploaded a better version to the handouts section. So please grab that zip file and use that version over the version that's in the SDK. We also provide online documentation. So once you install the SDK, or even before installing the SDK, you can go directly to the Autodesk.com site and say develop 3ds Max, and that's going to take you to the developer page for 3ds Max. And even here there is a link to the API documentation. Okay? You take it here and it's going to give you this location, and you can choose to download or read it online. Now, one thing about the online documentation is I would encourage you to try it before jumping to the download. So the first reason for that is because we often update the online documentation. The SDK doesn't get updated, and if you are trying to look for the most current information and you're looking at your static image that's on your local hard drive, you're not going to get those updates. So try to get used to using the online documentation if you can. The nice thing is that we've already updated it in several places for 2013 release, so it is working in that context. Now, the other thing, many people complained about the search engine in 2012. So one of the things that they've done is they've improved the search engine in 2013. So both the online help for the user side as well as the online help for the SDK has been improved. So you can see pretty quickly it comes back, has a little bit more robust results, gives you a summary of what that page is going to talk about, also tells you where the documentation is located. In some cases, it may actually find the documentation in other places. You can even change where it searches for. So if you're searching for a concept that you want to learn about in the SDK, but it may also have something to do with the user side, you can change this to everywhere or to documentation, and it's going to search everything and give you all the best results. Alright. So the SDK provides many samples, and the interesting thing about these samples is that many of them are actual in-the-box features. So we provide the source code for certain objects, certain modifiers, etc. that are part of 3ds Max out of the box. So you get the source code, you can rebuild it, you can change it, you can do what you want to. So I'm going to show that at the end of this section. We also support auto loading and delay loading, so your plugins will automatically be considered for load at startup, and if you configure your plugin in a certain way, it can be delay loaded until your feature is actually requested. And then the last thing is debug symbols are provided. So we now have an online symbol server that allows you to use the production version of 3ds Max and get symbols so that you can get more robust call stacks, and you can see the calling sequence that's occurring not only within your own application but within 3ds Max itself. So let's start by taking a quick look at the directory structure. Okay, so the directory structure here is listed in this help section. So under assemblies, you're going to have a static image of the .NET assembly files. I would encourage you just to ignore those. When you reference assemblies for .NET purposes, you're going to reference them directly from the 3ds Max installation. In the future, we're going to remove this directory because it just doesn't make sense. There is a help directory, and that includes the link to the online docs as well as a tool for generating class IDs. We're going to talk more about that later. There's a how-to section which includes samples that are not part of the product itself. Of course, there's an include directory that includes that contains the header files. There's the library files. There's the x64 version of the library files. And then the project settings, which contains the property sheets. So in 2013, we moved fully to the Visual Studio 2010 platform, and now we're using property sheets to handle the settings within a project. Library file. This is pretty important to read through. I'm not going to read each one of these, but this basically describes all of the libraries, and you can see that there's a number of libraries in this list. So it's important for you to kind of know which ones. Many of the projects, and what I might encourage you to do, is just include all the libs, and the linker is smart enough to know which ones to actually link when it's needed. And then finally, there's this section on the samples that are included. So this is very helpful to determine maybe which samples to look at when you're trying to decide how to start with a particular type of plugin. So for example, maybe you're thinking about creating a modifier plugin. What you would do is go into the modifiers section here, and you can review very quickly all the different modifiers that are included as samples. So let's say, for example, you might want to have some sort of morphing modifier beyond the scope of what Max already provides. So you could start with this sample code and expand upon it and create your own custom morpher modifier. Just a quick look at the plugin architecture. So of course we have 3ds Max EXE and all of its functionality as the core. And then there's this layer or entry point called the 3ds Max SDK. So this is all the libs and headers that give you the interfaces into working with all of these different subsystems. And what that results in is for you to determine which type of plugin you need to do. So here's some examples. A modeling plugin or a utility plugin. What that does is when you derive from one of our base classes, it gives you the interface into the two-way communication with 3ds Max itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of a few of the different plugins that ship with the SDK. So let me switch over here to 3ds Max. I'm going to go ahead and reset this scene. Okay. And the first plugin I'm going to show you is the Geosphere. Okay, so Geosphere actually ships with the SDK. So if we scroll back over here to my debug window, you can see that I'm running 3ds Max under debug, and I have some breakpoints. So the first one is in geosphere.cpp. That's a project that I extracted from the SDK samples and I created my own solution for. And as soon as I come over here and I click Geosphere and I start drawing that, you'll see I get a breakpoint into the Geosphere code. So the point here is that the source code for Geosphere is provided in the SDK. You can reuse it, you can modify it, you can do what you want to with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. and finish my geosphere construction. Just to show a different example, I'm going to go into the modifier list and I'm going to choose the melt modifier. So again, you see, bang, I'm hit in my source code that I've copied out of the SDK, and it's the exact same code that was used for the built-in feature. So let's go ahead and run that. We're done. Okay, and this final one is basically to show how easy it is to modify the base code. So what I did was I took the geosphere source code and I copied it and I made it into what I call a quick gear. So it's a very quick way to generate a gear. So I created a new category called quick primitives, and you'll see my new object here is called quick gear. And this is essentially the same code as in geosphere, except what I did was I went and I got the cylinder code to create a disk that I'm then going to change the way the faces are drawn around the edge to generate gear teeth. Okay, so let me go ahead and start that. You'll see here's my quick gear code. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and you'll see very quickly I was able to generate gear geometry. Okay, so that concludes the SDK presentation. I just wanted to give you a few extra resources. So if you go to the area site, there is the 3ds Max forum section. There's also a blog there that's done by Christopher Diggins that supports the 3ds Max SDK and scripting and some other things. So and then we also have the developer page, which I showed briefly earlier. It's the Develop 3ds Max at the Autodesk.com site. And here you'll find all of the entry points into the different resources that we provide for developing applications for 3ds Max. Okay. We are working on a new blog that is ADN specific, and I'm going to be a participant in that blog, so look for that coming in the future. And then some additional resources. Again, here's the developer page, and I mentioned the ADN program at the beginning of this presentation, so I hope that you'll take the chance to at least review that if you're not already an ADN member. And so what I'd like to do now is give you the exercise. So this is homework that I would like you to take a look at for tomorrow. So what you're going to do is you're going to locate and review the online documentation. I think this is step one. I think it's really important for you to understand where to find the documentation, how to get help when you're stuck. I would also encourage you to take a look at the developer page. And then next, I would like you to install the 3ds Max plugin wizard into your compiler. Okay, so there's complete instructions in the handout to tell you how to go about doing that. And after you've installed the plugin wizard, what you're going to do is you're going to create a utility plugin, and then you're going to build it and you're going to test it. Okay, so once you've got it built, you can review the structure of the plugin. And then I would like you to just follow these steps to add a prompt. Okay, we haven't talked about the SDK much at all yet, but what you can do is you can simply copy this code, put this one in the begin edit params and the pop prompt in the end edit params. And this is something that once you've created the skeleton, you'll see these are already stubbed out for you. So once you've done that and you're comfortable with that, optionally what you can do is you can go and work with the samples. Okay, so I would encourage you to at least take a look at geosphere and or melt just to kind of see that those samples are in the product, are also in the SDK. And then finally, if you want to go a little bit further and you have plenty of time on your hands, you can go ahead and modify one of those to do something different, very similar to what I did with the gear. So that concludes today's presentation, and I hope to see you here again tomorrow, and that's when we'll dive into the C++ SDK and really start talking about the constructs. Thanks much. See you tomorrow.